Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. Now, what have I got for you lovely folks today? Well, last week I did a snow scene and I had absolutely loads of you asking and requesting for some more snow scenes. So why not? We're going to have a go at this lovely little country pub in the snow. Now, some of you may recognise that I did one fairly similar to this last year. I'll link up here if you haven't seen it. But this one's much more of an evening feel and a bit of a snowstorm brewing. So come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. Okay, so for today's materials, my paper is some Arche Rough. It's 100% cotton. It's on a block, so it won't need stretching, but any decent watercolour paper will do. My colours today are cadmium yellow, French ultramarine, and you can use ordinary ultramarine. It's much the same, but the French version is just slightly warmer and more granular. Some yellow ochre, burnt sienna, Payne's grey, and some white gouache. 4 brushes from my range, 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round, and my trusty number 3 rigger. And here's the pencil sketch, and this one as ever is free to download from my website, link in the description below. Off we go, clean water and carefully painting around the buildings using my flat brush. And a little here in the foreground too. Now dropping in straight away some very diluted yellow ochre, just to add that little touch of warmth in the sky. And for this blue mix, I've just added a little Payne's grey to tone it down slightly, and letting everything mix and blend on the paper. Up here in the corner, a bit of a dramatic Payne's grey. I think there's a snowstorm brewing. So for all my background trees, I really want to create a misty feel, so I'm painting in using my number 12 brush, a much thicker consistency of the same blue, just suggesting very simple tree shapes. And to add a little bit of warmth, I'm adding in a touch of burnt sienna into the mix. And if you leave it to paint itself, you will naturally get these lovely soft edges reminiscent of these large fir trees. Softening the bottom edge of the bank and adding in those warmer tones with the burnt sienna. Now for the snow shadows, and the same blue mix again, and some of it is going into the area I pre-wet, giving some great soft edges, and some onto dry paper. Oh, and I mustn't forget to add that very light touch of yellow ochre reflected here in the snow. A very pale wash of the blue again, now using my number 6 brush. Next, this is a house back in the distance, so I'm just painting with the blue as a silhouette. And softening the edge with clean water. So for these ruts in the road, I'm wetting the top edge with clean water and then dropping in a darker value in the bottom edge, which really helps to give that illusion of a dent in the snow. So here I want to increase the contrast between the roof and the background, so I'm re-wetting and then dropping in those darker values, all using the same colours. Next, for this big tree, and I'm using the dry brush technique, keeping it flat to the paper to create this lovely random texture. But I'm also softening some of the areas with clean water. And when I link it all together with the branches, it will all make sense. Just dabbing out here with a tissue and a bit of random splattering. Same dry brush technique here for these bushes. Scratching here with the sharpened end of my brush. Much the same colours here, muted browns and greys. So now we need to let this totally dry. So it's a perfect time for a short break. And what about a glass of Jolly Holly festive ale? Next for this tree, and I'm lightly spraying with clean water, but not saturating it. Then I'm using this dull green mix, which suggests ivy growing up the trunk. And then painting in a dark value wet in wet with my number 6 brush. And I'm not really trying to create a shadow side, as the soft light is mainly coming in from the front. Now you can see the light spray is giving a slight fuzzy edge as I paint into some of those water droplets. Now with my trusty number 3 rigger for some of the smaller branches. Next, for this old wall, using a mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine, and I'm making sure that I leave that gap of white for the snow along the top. And here I'm just trying to blend the trunk into the wall, trying to keep lots of areas misty and undefined. And then continuing on to the building. Now this pub, the Holly Inn, is run by a lovely couple, Ron and Susan, and it's in the small village of West Upton in East Sussex. Of course, none of this is true, as I've made it all up, but it could be. It's very similar to many coaching inns that you get in the UK, and perhaps that building in the back is a small stabling yard. Anyway, it's all painted in fairly quickly, trying to get a relatively flat wash. Next, for the bottom part of the pub, now feel free to paint it in any colour you like, could even be white, but keep it subtle and light. So now the tree has dried, I'm going back in with my rigger for the smaller branches. And remember, some of them will grow in a downward direction. Next, I'm using the same colour that I painted the wall previously, but a slightly more concentrated consistency, and painting in the suggestion of shadows cast across the wall from the tree and the bushes. Now, it's not exactly precise, but it adds a nice dimension. And I'm using the same colour for all the shadow sides of the buildings and the odd little details. And for the shadows on the creamy coloured walls, I'm just using a darker version of the original colour. Now for some final dark details which should bring the whole painting together. I'm using the same brick colour, but I've added in a little Payne's grey for extra strength. Now less is more with these details. Just add in the odd little touch here and there. Your eye will just naturally fill in the rest. Next for the windows and some Payne's grey, and these are probably the darkest values in the paintings, but just try and paint them with one quick stroke. It doesn't have to be super neat. Need to paint in the pub sign? Again, just a simple silhouette, no detail needed. Little sign here, could perhaps be a menu board, as Sue does do an excellent Sunday roast. Now for the door here, I'm painting in the blue colour, but then I'm dropping in the top a thick consistency of Payne's grey to create that nice shadow. Here I just want to bring in a few branches in front of the wall. When it's dry, I like to soften a few edges with a damp tissue, just gives it a more natural feel. think we need an extra chimney pot here. A white pastel pencil for a few details, and it's perfect for smoke from this chimney, especially when you can soften with your finger, because Ron has had to relight the fire because the road to the village is closed. Now you can imagine the announcement.
Attention everyone! Looks like we've been snowed in, so we're going to be open the pub all night.
Yay! I'll have another one, please, Ron. Now with a creamy coloured pastel pencil for a few bush details. Next for a bit of sign writing, and I'll have to admit it was probably the hardest part of the whole painting, so don't feel you need to include it, it still works fine without. And I'm just using my rigger and some white gouache. And then a few little flicks of white snow here and there with my number 6 brush. So I'm going to sign this as if the painting is finished, as these last 2 additions aren't totally necessary. I'm adding in a little pheasant using all the same colour mixes, but his main body is in burnt sienna. Now painting something that's fairly detailed but so small is quite a challenge, so I'm using my rigger and slowly feeling my way around the shape. And I've just used a bit of Viridian green and some bright red on his head. Just make sure you leave that little white collar around his neck. And of course he needs a bit of that snow shadow colour to ground him onto the paper. Finally for some falling snow, and I'm using an old acrylic brush and some creamy white gouache and lightly tapping my brush against my finger. Now this is definitely worth practicing first on a scrap of dark paper or an old painting. So it's important you don't stay in one area too long, continually move around the painting. It can be very effective. And that should do it. All done. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. In fact, this was a project that we did in last Sunday's Christmas Creativities event, which went down really well, I think. Well, anyway, they're still talking to me. So as always, just make it your own and enjoy the experience. And please don't forget to like. Subscribe if you haven't already, it is free. Leave a comment, I do read every single one, although I haven't been able to reply to them all recently, but I'll try this week. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Take care everyone and have a great week. Cheers now.